The lunch rush at Magnolia's family restaurant was winding down when the biker walked in. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray afternoon that made people want comfort food and hot coffee, and the booths along the window were still half full with regulars finishing their meatloaf specials and chicken fried steaks. Cheryl Watkins saw him first. She was refilling the coffee station near the register when the front door swung open and a gust of cold air swept through the dining room, followed by a man who looked like he'd ridden straight out of a storm. His leather jacket was soaked through, water dripping from the hem onto the tile floor. His gray hair was plastered to his skull, and his beard, long, tangled, streaked with white, hung in wet clumps against his chest. He stood in the entrance for a moment, blinking against the fluorescent lights, looking around the room with the uncertain expression of someone who wasn't sure he'd be welcome. Cheryl had been waitressing at Magnolia's for 11 years. She'd seen all kinds walk through that door: truckers and businessmen, families and drifters, people at the best moments of their lives, and people at the worst. She'd learned to read them quickly, to figure out what they needed before they asked for it, to give them a little extra kindness when the world had clearly given them none. This man needed kindness. She could see it in the slump of his shoulders, in the way his hands trembled as he fumbled with the zipper of his jacket. He wasn't just wet and cold. He was beaten down in a way that went deeper than the weather. She grabbed a menu and walked toward him, her sneakers squeaking on the damp tile. "Afternoon, sir. Just one today?" He looked at her like he'd forgotten how to answer simple questions. Yeah, just me." "Follow me. I've got a booth near the heater. Warm you right up." She led him to the back corner, the spot she usually saved for her favorite regulars because it had a view of the whole restaurant and stayed toasty even when the front door kept opening. He slid into the booth with a grunt of relief, water pooling beneath him on the vinyl seat. "Can I get you some coffee to start? On the house. You look like you could use it." The man's eyes met hers, and Cheryl saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or just the raw vulnerability of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. "Coffee would be good." She brought him a mug, filled it to the brim, and set down a small dish of creamers. "Take your time with the menu. I'll check back in a few minutes." The restaurant was quiet now, most of the lunch crowd having paid their checks and headed back to work. Cheryl bussed a few tables, wiped down the counter, restocked the napkin dispensers. Normal Tuesday afternoon stuff. She kept half an eye on the man in the corner booth, watching him wrap his hands around the coffee mug like it was the only source of heat in the world. She was heading back to check on him when the kitchen door swung open and Gary Hendricks stepped out. Gary was the day manager, a position he'd held for 3 years and never let anyone forget. He was a thick man in his 40s with a receding hairline and a permanent expression of mild irritation, the kind of person who counted every napkin and timed every break, and believed that running a tight ship meant making everyone under him miserable. Cheryl had worked with bad managers before. It came with the territory, but Gary was a special kind of petty. He'd write you up for a stain on your apron while ignoring the fact that the walk-in cooler had been broken for 2 weeks. He spotted the biker in the corner booth, and his face went hard. "Cheryl, my office, now." She followed him to the cramped room behind the kitchen, her stomach already tightening with the familiar dread of being called out for something she hadn't done wrong. "What the hell is that?" Gary jabbed a finger toward the dining room. "A customer." "That's not a customer. That's a liability." He crossed his arms, his face reddening. "You know our policy on those people." "Those people?" "Gary, he's a man who came in out of the rain. He ordered coffee. He's a biker. Look at him. He's dripping all over the floor. He's scaring the other customers, and he's probably going to order the cheapest thing on the menu and sit there for 3 hours. Gary's voice rose. "I've told you before, we don't need that element in here. This is a family restaurant." Cheryl felt her own temper flare, but she kept her voice level. 11 years had taught her how to manage men like Gary. "He's not bothering anyone. He's sitting quietly, drinking his coffee. And I gave him the coffee for free, because he looked like he needed it." Gary's eyes bulged. "You gave him free coffee? Out of my restaurant?" "Out of basic human decency. That's not your call to make." Gary stepped closer, close enough that Cheryl could smell the cigarettes. He pretended he didn't smoke. "I want him out. Tell him we're closing for a private event, or that we're out of food, or whatever you have to say. Just get him out." "Gary, we're not closing, and we're obviously not out of food. I'm not going to lie to a customer." "Then I'll do it myself." He pushed past her and marched into the dining room, his shoulders squared with the self-importance of a man who'd finally found someone smaller than himself to push around. Cheryl hurried after him, her heart pounding. The biker looked up as Gary approached, his expression shifting from weary to wary. He'd seen this before. Cheryl could tell. He'd walked into places and been asked to leave, been told he wasn't welcome, been treated like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be served. "Excuse me, sir." Gary's voice was loud enough to carry across the dining room. The few remaining customers looked up from their plates, conversations dying mid-sentence. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man didn't move. "I haven't finished my coffee. We're closing early today. Private event." "There's no private event." Cheryl stepped forward, placing herself between Gary and the booth. "Gary, stop this." "Cheryl, get back to work. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when you're throwing out a paying customer for no reason." "He's not a paying customer. You gave him free coffee, remember?" Gary's face twisted into a sneer. "And look at him. He's a mess. He's making the whole place smell like wet dog. I've got families in here, kids. I'm not going to have them eating their lunch next to some homeless biker who wandered in off the street." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Cheryl saw the man flinch, saw something close off behind his eyes, a door slamming shut, a wall going up. He started to rise from the booth, his movement slow and defeated. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'll go." "No." The word came out of Cheryl's mouth before she could stop it. "You're not going anywhere. You're a customer, and you have every right to be here." Gary rounded on her, his face purple with rage. "Who do you think you're talking to? I'm your manager. I make the decisions here, not you. And if you can't follow simple instructions, then what? You'll fire me." Cheryl heard her own voice rising, felt the eyes of every customer in the restaurant watching, and didn't care. "Go ahead, Gary. Fire me for treating a human being with basic respect. Fire me for giving a man a cup of coffee on a cold day. I've been here 11 years, 11 years of doubles and holidays and covering for people who didn't show up, and if this is what you think this job is about, then maybe I don't want to work here anymore." The silence that followed was absolute. Gary stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The other customers stared too, forks frozen halfway to mouths, conversations abandoned. And then, from the booth in the corner, the biker spoke. "Ma'am." His voice was stronger now, steadier. "You don't have to do this. I don't want you to lose your job over me." Cheryl turned to look at him. His eyes were wet. Not from the rain, she realized, but from something else, something deeper. "I'm not doing this for you," she said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm doing this because it's right, because this is still my restaurant too, no matter what Gary thinks. And in my restaurant, we don't turn people away just because they look different or don't fit some idea of who belongs." She turned back to Gary and untied her apron. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I quit." She dropped the apron on the nearest table and walked toward the front door. Behind her, she heard Gary sputtering, heard the murmur of the other customers, heard a chair scrape as someone stood up. But she didn't look back. She pushed through the door and stepped out into the cold October afternoon, the rain misting against her face, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She'd worked at Magnolia's for 11 years. She had a daughter in middle school, rent due next week, a car that needed new tires. She had no savings, no backup plan, no idea what she was going to do next. But she'd done the right thing. She knew that much. Whatever happened next, she'd done the right thing. She was halfway across the parking lot when she heard the door open behind her. "Ma'am, wait." She turned. The biker was standing in the entrance of the restaurant, rain already soaking into his jacket again. His face was different now, not closed off anymore, but open, raw. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about who I am." Cheryl waited, the rain running down her face, her whole future suddenly uncertain. "My name is Vincent Caruso," the man said, "and I'm the president of the Iron Brotherhood." The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head slightly. "We're one of the largest motorcycle clubs in the Southwest," Vincent continued. 15 chapters, over 2,000 members. He paused, something flickering in his eyes. "I've been on the road for 3 weeks. My wife passed away last month, and I didn't know what else to do. I've just been riding, trying to outrun something that can't be outrun." Cheryl felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry for your loss. What you did in there, standing up for me, giving up your job." Vincent's voice cracked. "Nobody's done anything like that for me in a long time. Most people see the jacket and the bike, and they make up their minds before I ever say a word. Most people are wrong. Vincent nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, old, battered. The screen cracked in one corner. I need to make a call, he said, and then I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Cheryl looked at this stranger, this grieving man, this president of a club she'd never heard of, this person who had somehow become the reason she no longer had a job. She thought about her daughter, her rent, her tires. She thought about everything she had to lose. Then she thought about the look on Gary's face when she'd dropped her apron on the table and the feeling in her chest when she'd walked out that door. Yeah, she said, I can do that. Vincent raised the phone to his ear and waited. When someone answered, he spoke 4 words that would change everything. I need the Brotherhood. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Cheryl stood in the parking lot, rain soaking through her uniform shirt, watching Vincent pace back and forth as he spoke in low, urgent tones. She couldn't hear most of what he said, just fragments, names she didn't recognize, directions to somewhere she'd never been. When he hung up, he walked back to her with a different energy than before. The defeated slump was gone from his shoulders. Something had shifted behind his eyes, a clarity, a purpose. I need you to do something for me, he said. Go home, get some rest, and be back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Cheryl blinked. Why? What's happening tomorrow? You'll see. Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. Before she could protest, he pressed a handful of bills into her hand. She didn't count them, but she could feel the thickness of the stack. This is for your trouble. There's for the coffee. For standing up when you didn't have to. I can't take this. You can, and you will. His voice was firm but kind. Consider it a loan against future good fortune. You're going to need your strength for what comes next. What comes next? I don't understand. Vincent almost smiled. It was a tired expression, weighted with grief, but there was warmth in it too. Neither do I, most days, but I've learned that when someone does right by you, you do right by them. That's the code. That's how we live. He nodded toward her car, a dented Civic parked near the dumpsters. Go home, hug your daughter, get some sleep, and trust that tomorrow is going to be different. He turned and walked to his motorcycle, a massive Harley that had been parked at the far end of the lot, barely visible through the rain. He mounted it with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle, kicked the engine to life, and rode off without looking back. Cheryl stood alone in the empty parking lot, the money clutched in her fist, the rain running down her face. Through the window of magnolias, she could see Gary behind the register, his face still red, his hands gesturing angrily at one of the other waitresses. The lunch crowd had thinned to nothing. The restaurant looked smaller than it had that morning, meaner, somehow. She got in her car and drove home. Her apartment was a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a complex that had seen better days. The carpet was worn, the appliances were ancient, and the heating system made a sound like a dying animal every time it kicked on. But it was home, hers and Maddie's, and they'd made it work for the past 4 years, ever since the divorce had left her with nothing but debt and determination. Maddie was at school, wouldn't be home until 3:30. Cheryl sat at the kitchen table and counted the money Vincent had given her. $400 in 20s and 10s, more cash than she'd seen in one place in months. She thought about the bills on the counter, electric, water, the credit card minimum she'd been putting off. She thought about the tires she needed, the groceries she'd been stretching, the field trip permission slip she'd had to mark unable to attend because she couldn't afford the $20 fee. $400 wouldn't solve everything, but it would buy her time. It would keep the lights on while she figured out what came next. She showered, changed into dry clothes, and made herself a cup of tea. Then she sat on the couch and stared at the wall, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 2 hours. She'd quit her job. After 11 years, she'd walked out. No notice, no backup plan, just a moment of righteous anger, and an apron dropped on a table. What had she been thinking? But even as the fear crept in, the cold, practical fear of bills and rent and an empty bank account, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. She kept seeing the look on Vincent's face when Gary had called him a mess, a liability, someone who didn't belong. She kept hearing her own voice, stronger than she'd known it could be. In my restaurant, we don't turn people away just because they look different. It had felt good. It had felt right. And whatever consequences were coming, she'd face them the same way she'd faced everything else, one day at a time, one foot in front of the other. Maddie came home at 3:45, bursting through the door with her backpack trailing behind her and a story about something that had happened at lunch that absolutely could not wait. She was 12, all legs and elbows and dramatic gestures, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. She'd been the center of Cheryl's world since the day she was born, the reason she got up in the morning, the reason she kept fighting even when fighting seemed pointless. "Mom, why are you home early?" Cheryl patted the couch beside her. "Sit down, baby. We need to talk." She told Maddie everything about the biker, about Gary, about quitting her job. She didn't sugarcoat it or make excuses. Maddie was old enough to understand that life was complicated, that sometimes doing the right thing came with a cost. When she finished, Maddie was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned over and hugged her mother, fierce and tight. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That manager sounds like a jerk." Cheryl laughed despite herself. "He really is." "So what happens now?" "I don't know. The man, Vincent, he asked me to come back to the restaurant tomorrow morning. He said something's going to happen, but he wouldn't tell me what." Maddie's eyes widened. "Like a surprise? A good surprise or a bad surprise?" "I honestly have no idea." Cheryl smoothed her daughter's hair back from her face. "But I promised I'd be there, and I keep my promises." "Can I come?" "You have school." "Mom, this is way more important than school. This is like a life event." Maddie clasped her hands together in exaggerated pleading. "Please, I'll do extra homework. I'll clean my room. Okay. Cheryl held up her hands in surrender. "But if it turns out to be nothing, you're going straight to class afterward." "Deal." They ordered pizza for dinner, a splurge, but Cheryl figured they'd earned it, and watched a movie on the couch, Maddie's head resting on her shoulder. By 9 o'clock, they were both asleep, the TV still flickering in the darkened room. Cheryl dreamed about motorcycles, hundreds of them thundering down a highway she didn't recognize, their headlights cutting through fog. She was running alongside them, trying to keep up, but they were too fast, always just out of reach. And then, in the way of dreams, she was on one of the bikes herself, the wind in her hair, the road stretching out to infinity. She woke at 6, her heart racing, the dream already fading. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but there was a brightness behind the clouds that promised the sun might break through. She made breakfast, eggs and toast, the last of the orange juice, and got Maddie up and dressed. They left the apartment at 8:30, giving themselves plenty of time for the 15-minute drive to Magnolia's. The parking lot was empty when they arrived. The restaurant didn't open until 10 on weekdays, and the only car in sight was Gary's silver Camry, parked in its usual spot near the back entrance. The open sign in the window was dark. Cheryl parked near the front and killed the engine. She and Maddie sat in silence, watching the restaurant, waiting. "Mom? What are we looking for?" "I don't know, baby. Vincent just said to be here at 9. It's 8:52. Then we wait." They didn't have to wait long. At 8:57, Cheryl heard it, a low rumble in the distance like thunder rolling across the plains, but the sky was clearing, no storm in sight. The sound grew louder, closer, resolving into something familiar, yet impossible. Engines, dozens of them, maybe more. Maddie pressed her face to the window. Mom, look." They came over the rise at the edge of the highway, a river of chrome and leather flowing toward the restaurant. Motorcycles in formation, 2 by 2, their headlights blazing even in the gray morning light. The sound of their engines shook the car, rattled the windows of the restaurant, seemed to vibrate in Cheryl's chest like a second heartbeat. "Oh my God," she breathed. The first bikes turned into the parking lot, followed by more and more, until the entire lot was filled with motorcycles, gleaming Harleys and vintage Indians and custom choppers, their riders dismounting in a choreographed wave of leather and denim. Cheryl tried to count them and gave up somewhere past 100. At the front of the procession, leading the charge, was Vincent Caruso. He pulled his bike to a stop directly in front of Cheryl's car and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost as overwhelming as the noise had been. He dismounted, removed his helmet, and walked toward her with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Good morning," he said. "I brought some friends." Cheryl opened her car door and stepped out, her legs unsteady. Maddie scrambled out behind her, her eyes wide as saucers. "Vincent, what is all this?" "This is the Iron Brotherhood. 15 chapters, 2,000 members, and about 300 of them are standing in this parking lot right now." Vincent's smile widened. They all wanted to meet. The woman who gave up her job to defend a stranger. Cheryl looked at the sea of faces surrounding her, men and women of every age, their leather vests covered in patches and pins, their expressions ranging from curious to amused to something that looked almost like reverence. Some of them nodded at her. Others raised their hands in greeting. A few were already walking toward the restaurant, peering through the windows with undisguised interest. "I don't understand," she said. "Why are they here?" "Because you did something rare yesterday." Vincent's voice dropped, became serious. "You saw someone who was hurting, and instead of looking away, you stepped up. You sacrificed something real to defend someone you didn't even know. That's not nothing, Cheryl. That's everything." He turned to face the crowd, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This woman is under the protection of the Brotherhood. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects all of us. And today, we're going to make sure the whole town knows it." A cheer went up from the assembled riders, a roar of approval that echoed off the walls of the restaurant. Cheryl felt Maddie's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. "Mom," Maddie whispered, "this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to us." Cheryl couldn't argue. She just stood there, surrounded by strangers who had somehow become allies, and watched as 300 bikers prepared to change her life forever. Inside the restaurant, she could see Gary's face pressed against the window, his expression cycling through confusion, alarm, and something that looked very much like fear. Good, she thought. Let him be afraid for once. The morning was just getting started. Gary Hendricks emerged from the restaurant at 9:07, his face the color of old milk. He stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame like he might fall over without its support, his eyes scanning the sea of motorcycles and leather jackets that had transformed his parking lot into something out of a fever dream. What is this?" His voice cracked on the second word. "This is private property. You can't just—" Vincent stepped forward and Gary flinched backward so hard he nearly tripped over the welcome mat. "Relax, friend. We're not here to cause trouble." Vincent's voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was steel underneath it. "We're here to have breakfast, all 300 of us. This is a restaurant, isn't it?" Gary's mouth opened and closed several times before sound came out. "We don't open until 10. "Then I suggest you open early." Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Unless you've got a policy against serving bikers. I seem to remember something about that from yesterday." The color returned to Gary's face, too much of it, flooding his cheeks with an angry red. He looked past Vincent to where Cheryl stood beside her car, Maddie still clutching her hand. "You!" He pointed at Cheryl, his finger trembling. "You did this. You called these people." "I didn't call anyone." Cheryl's voice was steadier than she felt. "I quit yesterday, remember? I'm just a customer now. A customer who'd like some breakfast." "We'd all like some breakfast," Vincent added. "And we'd like Cheryl to serve us, seeing as how she's the only person in this establishment who knows how to treat people with basic human decency." Gary sputtered. "She doesn't work here anymore. She quit." "Then hire her back." "I can't just— the owner, corporate policy. Let me make this simple." Vincent took another step forward, and this time Gary didn't retreat. He was backed against the door, nowhere left to go. "You have two choices. Choice one, you open this restaurant, you rehire Cheryl at double her previous salary, and you serve every single person in this parking lot with a smile on your face. We'll pay full price for everything, we'll tip generously, and we'll leave you a review so glowing it'll bring in customers for the next 5 years. He paused, letting that sink in. Choice two, we leave. We take our business elsewhere, and every biker in the state of Oklahoma, hell, every biker in the Southwest, learns that Magnolia's Family Restaurant doesn't welcome veterans, doesn't welcome working people, and doesn't welcome anyone who doesn't fit some narrow idea of what a family looks like." Vincent's voice dropped to something just above a whisper. "How do you think that'll play with your corporate overlords?" The parking lot was silent. 300 riders stood motionless, watching the exchange, their presence a weight that pressed down on the moment like a physical force. Inside the restaurant, Cheryl could see the other morning staff, 2 cooks and a busboy who'd arrived for prep work, pressed against the kitchen window, their faces pale with shock. Gary looked at Vincent. He looked at the bikers. He looked at Cheryl, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before in 11 years of working for him. Defeat. "Fine," he said, the word coming out like he was spitting poison. "She's rehired. Double salary. But this is extortion. I'm calling the owner. I'm calling corporate. You're going to open the restaurant," Vincent said calmly, "and you're going to do your job, just like Cheryl's been doing hers for the past 11 years, while you counted napkins and made everyone miserable. He turned his back on Gary, a deliberate gesture, a dismissal, and walked to where Cheryl stood. "Well," he said, "you ready to go back to work?" Cheryl looked at the restaurant, at Gary's humiliated face, at the army of bikers waiting to follow her inside. She thought about the bills on her counter, the rent due next week, the tires she needed. She thought about Maddie, still holding her hand, looking up at her with an expression of pure wonder. "On one condition," she said. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "Maddie helps. She can bus tables, refill waters, whatever. Needs doing." Cheryl squeezed her daughter's hand. She wanted to see what was going to happen. She should be part of it. Vincent looked at Maddie, who straightened her spine and tried to look as professional as a 12-year-old in jeans and a hoodie could look. "Can you carry a tray without dropping it?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Can you smile at customers even when you don't feel like it?" "My mom taught me." Vincent nodded solemnly. "Then you're hired. Temporary position, ends when breakfast does. Pay is $100 plus tips." Maddie's eyes went wide. $100? "You drive a hard bargain, but I'll manage." Vincent winked at Cheryl. "She gets it from her mother." The next 3 hours were the most chaotic, exhilarating, exhausting morning of Cheryl's life. 300 bikers filed into Magnolia's family restaurant in shifts. The place only held about 80 at a time, so they rotated, some eating, while others waited in the parking lot, swapping stories and admiring each other's bikes. The kitchen went into overdrive, the two cooks working faster than Cheryl had ever seen them, plates of eggs and pancakes and bacon flying out of the window like a short-order ballet. Cheryl moved through the dining room in a blur, taking orders and refilling coffees and delivering food with an efficiency born of 11 years' practice. But something was different now. The weight she usually carried, the dread of Gary's criticism, the exhaustion of being undervalued, the quiet desperation of never having enough, had lifted. In its place was something lighter, brighter. Joy, maybe, or just the simple pleasure of doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who appreciated it. The bikers were unfailingly polite. They said please and thank you. They cleaned up after themselves. They left tips that made Cheryl's eyes water. One woman, a grandmother with silver hair and a vest covered in military patches, pressed a $50 bill into her hand and said, "For your daughter's college fund, start saving now." Maddie worked alongside her, ferrying water pitchers and clearing plates with a determination that made Cheryl's heart swell. The bikers treated her like a mascot, asking about school and complimenting her work ethic and telling her she had the makings of a fine businesswoman. By 10:30, Maddie was grinning so hard her face must have hurt. Gary stayed in his office for most of the morning, emerging only when absolutely necessary, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Every time he looked at Cheryl, she could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of consequences, the search for leverage. But there was nothing he could do, not with 300 witnesses watching his every move. Around 11, Vincent found Cheryl during a rare quiet moment, when the current wave of customers was finishing up and the next wave hadn't yet been seated. "How are you holding up?" "I'm exhausted." Cheryl leaned against the counter, her feet aching. "But it's a good exhausted, if that makes any sense." "It makes perfect sense." Vincent's expression softened. "I want to tell you something about why I was in such bad shape yesterday." Cheryl waited, giving him the space to speak. "My wife, Rosa, she passed away 6 weeks ago. Cancer. We'd been married 34 years. Vincent's voice was steady, but Cheryl could hear the cracks beneath the surface. "After the funeral, I couldn't stay in our house. Couldn't look at her chair, her books, her coffee cup in the sink, so I got on my bike and started riding. Didn't have a destination, just needed to move. I'm so sorry, Vincent. I'd been on the road for 3 weeks when I walked into your restaurant. I was cold, I was wet, I hadn't slept properly in days, and I was—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "I was thinking about giving up. Not in the dramatic sense, just stopping, pulling over somewhere and not getting back on the bike, letting the road take me wherever it wanted." Cheryl felt her throat constrict. She'd seen that look before, in the faces of people who'd reached the end of their rope. She'd seen it in her own mirror, in the darkest months after her divorce. "And then you walked up to me with that coffee," Vincent continued, "and you didn't look at me like I was a problem to be solved. You looked at me like I was a person who deserved to be warm and fed and treated with respect." His eyes glistened. "That sounds like such a small thing, but it wasn't. It was everything." Cheryl didn't trust herself to speak. She just reached out and took his hand. her small fingers wrapped around his weathered ones. "When that manager started yelling at you, when I saw you give up your job rather than be part of something cruel, I knew I'd found something rare." Vincent squeezed her hand gently. "Rosa used to say that the world is full of ordinary miracles, people doing small, brave things that nobody notices. She said those miracles are what keep the whole thing from falling apart." He released her hand and stepped back, composing himself. "You're an ordinary miracle, Cheryl, and I'm going to make sure you never forget it." Before she could respond, the door swung open and another wave of bikers streamed in, hungry and loud and ready to be served. Cheryl wiped her eyes, straightened her apron, and got back to work, but something had shifted inside her. Some weight she'd been carrying for years, the doubt, the fear, the nagging voice that said she wasn't enough, had cracked open and begun to crumble. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Gary would find a way to retaliate, or if corporate would get involved, or if tomorrow would bring new problems she couldn't anticipate. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. She had 300 people in leather jackets who'd ridden across the state to stand beside her, and a daughter who was learning what it meant to be brave, and a grieving man who'd called her an ordinary miracle. That was enough. That was more than enough. The lunch rush was just beginning, and Cheryl Watkins was ready for whatever came next. The last of the bikers left Magnolia's just after 2 o'clock. They filed out in the same orderly fashion they'd arrived, shaking Cheryl's hand, pressing tips into her palm, promising to spread the word about the restaurant that had done right by one of their own. A few of them hugged Maddie, who accepted the embraces with the self-conscious grace of a 12-year-old who was trying very hard to be cool about the most exciting day of her life. Vincent was the last to go. He stood in the parking lot beside his Harley, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds and catching the chrome, making it gleam like something precious. "You did good today," he said to Cheryl, "both of you. I didn't do anything except my job." "That's exactly what you did. Your job, the way it should be done, with kindness, with dignity." Vincent pulled on his riding gloves, flexing his fingers inside the leather. "That's rarer than you think." Cheryl looked back at the restaurant. Through the window, she could see Gary in his office, hunched over his desk, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling corporate, probably trying to figure out how to spin this, probably planning his revenge. She didn't care. Whatever he did next, she'd handle it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now? You go home, you rest, you count your tips." Vincent smiled. "And you keep being exactly who you are. The world needs more people like you, Cheryl. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." "And you? Where will you go?" Vincent looked toward the horizon, toward the highway that stretched into the distance. "Home, I think. Back to Rosa's grave. I've been running from it for weeks, but—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "I think I'm ready now. Ready to say goodbye properly. That takes courage. So does quitting your job to defend a stranger." He mounted his bike and kicked the engine to life, the rumble filling the parking lot. "Take care of yourself, Cheryl, and take care of that daughter of yours. She's going to do great things." He raised a hand in farewell, then pulled out of the lot and onto the highway. Cheryl watched until he was just a speck on the horizon, until the sound of his engine had faded into the ordinary noise of traffic and wind. Maddie appeared at her elbow, holding a plastic bag stuffed with cash. Mom, look at this." Cheryl took the bag and peered inside. It was full of bills. 1s and 5s and 10s and 20s, crumpled and folded, the accumulated tips from 300 grateful customers. She didn't count it, but she could tell it was more money than she'd made in tips over the past 3 months combined. "We need to split this with the kitchen staff," she said, "and the busboy. They work just as hard as we did." "I already thought of that." Maddie grinned. "I set aside a third for them. This is just our share." Cheryl stared at her daughter, this smart, kind, thoughtful girl who had spent the morning working alongside bikers and somehow come out of it more mature than she'd been when she woke up. "When did you get so grown up?" "I learned from watching you." Maddie took her hand. "Can we go home now? I'm really tired." "Yeah, baby, let's go home." They drove in comfortable silence, the bag of tips sitting on Maddie's lap like a trophy. The streets looked different somehow, brighter, more alive, full of possibility instead of threat. Cheryl knew it was just her perception, just the afterglow of an extraordinary morning, but she let herself enjoy it anyway. At home, they counted the money together at the kitchen table. Their share came to $847. Added to the $400 Vincent had given her yesterday, Cheryl now had over $1,200 in cash, enough to pay her overdue bills, buy the tires she needed, and still have some left over for groceries. Mom? Maddie looked up from the pile of sorted bills. Are we going to be okay? We're going to be fine, baby. Cheryl reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. Better than fine. The phone rang at 4:30. Cheryl answered it in the kitchen, expecting a telemarketer or a bill collector. Instead, she heard a voice she didn't recognize, female, professional, with the crisp diction of someone who spent their days in conference rooms. Ms. Watkins, this is Diana Okonkwo. I'm the regional director for Magnolia's Family Restaurants. Cheryl's stomach dropped. Yes? I've spent the last several hours reviewing the events that occurred at your location today. I've spoken with Mr. Hendricks, I've reviewed the security footage, and I've received approximately 200 phone calls and emails from customers who witnessed what happened. Diana paused. I'd like to discuss the situation with you, if you have a moment. Am I in trouble? On the contrary, Ms. Watkins, I'm calling to offer you a job. Cheryl sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I don't understand. Let me be direct. What Mr. Hendricks did yesterday was unacceptable. His treatment of that customer, and of you, violated every principle this company claims to stand for. We market ourselves as a family restaurant, Ms. Watkins. That means welcoming everyone, regardless of how they look or where they come from. Diana's voice hardened slightly. Mr. Hendricks will be terminated effective immediately, and I'd like you to take his place. You want me to be the manager? I want you to be the general manager. Full authority over hiring, scheduling, and day-to-day operations. Salary of $62,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a performance bonus structure that could add another 10 to 15%. Diana paused. I've also been authorized to offer you a signing bonus of $5,000, payable immediately. Cheryl's mind raced. $62,000, benefits, a signing bonus. It was more than twice what she'd been making as a waitress, more than she'd ever earned in her life. Why me? She managed. There must be more qualified people. There are people with more management experience, yes, but experience isn't everything. Diana's tone softened. Ms. Watkins, I watched the security footage from yesterday. I saw you stand up to your manager. I saw you give up your job rather than participate in something cruel. And I saw you walk out that door with your head held high, knowing you'd done the right thing. She paused. That's the kind of person I want running my restaurant. Someone with integrity. Someone who understands that how we treat people matters more than how much we profit from them. Another pause. So what do you say? Cheryl looked at Maddie, who had crept into the kitchen and was listening with her eyes wide. She thought about the past 24 hours, the biker in the rain, the confrontation with Gary, the army of motorcycles in the parking lot, the tips stuffed into a plastic bag. She thought about Vincent's words, "You're an ordinary miracle." I say yes, she said. When do I start? Monday morning, 8 o'clock. I'll be there personally to handle the transition. Diana's voice warmed. Welcome aboard, Ms. Watkins. I have a feeling you're going to do great things. The call ended, and Cheryl sat in the kitchen, holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. Maddie launched herself across the room and wrapped her arms around her mother, squeezing tight. Mom, you're going to be the manager. That's amazing. I know, baby. I can't believe it. I can. Maddie pulled back, her face serious. You deserve it. You've always deserved it. They just finally figured it out. Cheryl pulled her daughter close again, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. 24 hours ago, she'd been a waitress living paycheck to paycheck, dreading another day of Gary's petty tyrannies. Now she was a general manager with a salary she'd never dreamed of, a bag full of cash on the kitchen table, and a story that would be told for years to come. All because she'd given a cup of coffee to a man who looked like he needed it. That night, after Maddie was asleep, Cheryl sat on the couch in the dark living room and let herself cry. Not from sadness, from something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the overwhelming weight of a life that had suddenly changed direction, like a river, finding a new channel after years of pushing against the same stubborn banks. She thought about Rosa, the wife Vincent had lost. She thought about the 34 years they'd had together, the love that had sustained them, the grief that had nearly destroyed him. She thought about ordinary miracles, small acts of kindness, moments of courage, the choice to do right even when it cost you something. Tomorrow, she would go back to Magnolia's. She would walk through those doors not as a waitress but as a manager. She would hire good people and treat them well. She would make sure that every customer who walked through the door, every single one, regardless of how they looked or what they wore, was welcomed with warmth and served with respect. She would build something worth being proud of, and every time she felt tired, every time the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her, she would remember a rainy October afternoon and a man who'd taught her that kindness was never wasted. It always came back, sometimes in ways you never expected. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon in April, Cheryl stood behind the counter of Magnolia's family restaurant and watched the lunch crowd filter in. The place looked different now. Fresh paint on the walls, new menus with better prices, a community bulletin board near the entrance where locals could post flyers for garage sales and charity events. The changes were small, but they added up to something bigger, a restaurant that felt like it belonged to the people who ate there. The staff was different too. Cheryl had hired carefully, looking not just for experience but for kindness, people who understood that a meal was about more than food, that sometimes a customer needed a smile or a listening ear as much as they needed a plate of eggs. The kitchen ran smoother now, the turnover had dropped to almost nothing, and the online reviews had gone from mediocre to glowing. Business was up 30% from last year. Diana Okonkwo had called twice to congratulate her. Maddie was at her usual spot in the corner booth, doing homework with a milkshake at her elbow. She came to the restaurant most weekends now, sometimes helping out during rush hours, sometimes just keeping her mother company. The $100 she'd earned on that chaotic October morning had gone into a savings account, the first deposit toward a college fund that was slowly growing. Cheryl was refilling the coffee station when the front door opened and a familiar rumble filled the air. She looked up to see Vincent Caruso walking toward her, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his leather jacket clean and well-maintained. Behind him, visible through the window, was his Harley, and behind that, a line of motorcycles stretching down the block. Not 300 this time, but enough, 50, maybe 60. "Vincent!" Cheryl came around the counter to meet him, her face breaking into a smile. "You didn't tell me you were coming. Wanted it to be a surprise." He embraced her, a brief hug that carried the weight of everything they'd been through together. "You look good, Cheryl. The job agrees with you." "It does." She stepped back, looking past him at the crowd of bikers filing into the parking lot. "What's all this?" "Annual spring ride. We do it every year. Charity thing, raise money for veterans' causes." Vincent's eyes twinkled. "I convinced the boys to make Magnolia's our lunch stop. Figured you could use the business. I think we can handle it." Cheryl was already calculating how many could fit in the dining room, how many would need to wait, how much extra food they'd need from the kitchen. "Give me 5 minutes to brief the staff." She moved through the restaurant with the calm efficiency she'd developed over the past 6 months, letting the cooks know what was coming, assigning extra servers to the floor, making sure every table had fresh silverware and full condiment bottles. By the time the first wave of bikers walked through the door, Magnolia's was ready. The next 2 hours were a happy chaos, plates flying, coffee pouring, conversation buzzing. The bikers were the same mix of rough exteriors and gentle manners she remembered from October. Please and thank you, generous tips, stories exchanged with regular customers who'd never met a motorcycle club member before and found themselves pleasantly surprised. Maddie abandoned her homework to help, just like she had that first time. She was taller now, more confident, moving through the dining room with a tray balanced on one hand, like she'd been doing it for years. More than one biker commented on her poise, her work ethic, her obvious pride in her mother's restaurant. Around 2:30, when the crowd had thinned and the kitchen was catching its breath, Vincent found Cheryl in the back office. She was entering receipts into the computer, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Got a minute?" She looked up. "For you?" "Always." Vincent sat down in the chair across from her desk, the same chair where Gary used to sit, back when this office had been a place of dread rather than purpose. "I wanted to give you an update about me. How are you doing?" "Better." He said the word like he meant it, like it wasn't just a reflex. "I went back to Rose's grave like I said I would. Spent a whole day there, just talking to her, telling her about you, about what happened here. I think she would have liked you. I think I would have liked her too. I'm seeing a counselor now. VA program, twice a week." Vincent's jaw tightened, the old resistance flickering briefly before he pushed through it. "It's hard, talking about things I spent 30 years trying to forget, but it's helping. I can feel it helping. I'm glad, Vincent, really glad. There's something else." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, not thick like the one from October, but substantial enough. The ride today wasn't just about charity. It was about you. Cheryl frowned. What do you mean? The club took a vote last month. Unanimous decision. Vincent set the envelope on her desk. We want to establish a scholarship fund in Rosa's name for kids of single parents, kids like Maddie, who are working hard and deserve a chance. He pushed the envelope toward her. We want you to run it. Cheryl stared at the envelope, then at Vincent. I don't know anything about running a scholarship fund. You know how to help people. That's the only qualification that matters. Vincent leaned forward. There's $10,000 in that envelope. Seed money from the club's general fund. We'll add to it every year. Fundraisers, donations, whatever we can scrape together. And you'll decide who gets it. Who needs it? Who deserves a second chance? The words hit Cheryl like a wave. She thought about her own life. The struggles, the setbacks, the moments when a little bit of help would have changed everything. She thought about Maddie, about the savings account that was growing so slowly, about the college applications that would come in just a few years. Why me? She asked, her voice rough. You could find someone with more experience, more connections. I could find someone with a fancier resume. Vincent's voice was firm, but I couldn't find someone with a bigger heart. You showed me that 6 months ago, when you gave up everything to defend a stranger. And you've shown it every day since, in how you run this place, how you treat your staff, how you raise your daughter. He stood, reaching across the desk to take her hand. Rosa believed that kindness was the only thing worth leaving behind. Not money, not possessions, kindness. The way you treat people when you don't have to, when nobody's watching, when it would be easier to look the other way. He squeezed her hand gently. You're the kindest person I've ever met, Cheryl. That's why I want you to carry this forward. For Rosa. For all the people who need what you have to give. Cheryl couldn't speak. She just held his hand, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was offering. Not just money, but trust. Faith. A legacy to carry forward. Okay, she finally managed. I'll do it. Vincent smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the smile reached all the way to his eyes. No shadow of grief, no lingering pain, just warmth. I knew you would. He left an hour later, riding off at the head of his convoy, the thunder of 50 engines shaking the windows of Magnolia's family restaurant. Cheryl stood in the parking lot and watched them go, the envelope tucked safely in her apron pocket, her daughter standing beside her. Mom? Maddie's voice was quiet. What's in the envelope? The future, baby. Cheryl put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Someone else's future and maybe a little bit of ours. They stood there until the last motorcycle had disappeared over the horizon, until the sound of engines had faded into the ordinary noise of a Saturday afternoon. Then they went back inside, back to the restaurant that had become something more than a business, a gathering place, a community hub, a testament to what could happen when one person decided to do the right thing. The scholarship fund launched 3 months later. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl named Maria, daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. Maria was going to be the first person in her family to attend college. She cried when Cheryl told her the news, and Cheryl cried too, and they hugged in the middle of the restaurant while the lunch crowd pretended not to notice. There would be more recipients in the years to come, dozens of them, eventually, kids from all over the state who needed a hand up and found it waiting for them. The Rosa Caruso Memorial Scholarship, administered by a waitress-turned-manager who had once given a cup of coffee to a stranger in the rain. That was the thing about kindness, Cheryl had learned. It didn't stay where you put it. It moved, it grew, it found new channels and new recipients. You could give away everything you had and somehow end up with more than you started with. She thought about that a lot in the quiet moments. Early mornings before the restaurant opened, late nights after everyone had gone home. She thought about Vincent and Rosa, about ordinary miracles, about the strange and wonderful path that had brought her from that rainy October afternoon to this place of purpose and belonging. And every time a new customer walked through the door, tired, wet, uncertain, she made sure to greet them with a smile and a cup of coffee. You never knew who needed saving. You never knew whose life you might change with a simple act of kindness. All you could do was keep trying, keep giving, keep believing that it mattered. Cheryl Watkins believed, and every day, in small ways and large ones, she proved it.